Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie. And we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything.
Hello, friends. It's another great day of studying the New Testament together on A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Katie, and it's my joy to be a co-host on this journey with you through Scripture. We are currently in Acts, and friends, after today, we only have 3 chapters left in this study of the early church. I think this study through the Gospels this year, and now Acts, has set us up so well to read the epistles in coming months. But for now, let's take a look at Acts 25. On first glance, this chapter may seem a bit dry. But if we dig a little deeper, this chapter is like part 2 of a 3-part movie series, where part 2 isn't the most exciting movie, but it holds key information about understanding the trilogy of a whole. Why is it important? Well, we'll get to that. First, we have a lot of names at play in this chapter. Paul, of course, Festus, King Agrippa's sister named Bernice. Let's do something a little different and go through each of these names to better understand the chapter as a whole. Let's catch up on Paul. We know him dearly. He's the Pharisee, the persecutor of Christians, turned bold missionary who suffered repeatedly because of his faithfulness to share the gospel. At this point in Acts, he has been held in Roman custody for 2 years. A previous governor, Felix, continued to delay the verdict brought against Paul by the Jews. They falsely accused him of defiling the temple in Jerusalem. Another important detail, Paul is a Roman citizen, which means he is entitled to a fair trial and a conviction before receiving a punishment like death, which the Jews would love nothing more than. Even as Paul waits, he knows where he is heading. Jesus has previously told Paul that he will one day preach the gospel in Rome. In today's chapter, we will get some momentum as he moves towards Rome. If you've ever been in a season of waiting, a season where your life seems to be at a standstill, you can understand where Paul is at here. But Paul was not waiting in idleness. He was still hearing updates from the churches, and perhaps, as some scholars believe, Luke researched and wrote his gospel during this time. Paul was still active in ministry, even in custody. All right, let's move to Festus. He is somewhat of a new figure to us. He's a governor who succeeded Felix, who originally heard Paul's trial. Paul was a sort of political pawn for Felix. He wanted to keep the Jews happy, and he knew that the Jews hated Paul, so he kept him in prison. But Festus wants to tie up loose ends left by Felix. Only 3 days into Festus's reign as governor, he visits Jerusalem, where the Jews waste no time telling him about this man named Paul. They used Festus's new leadership as a way to get what they want. They ask Paul to be tried in Jerusalem, but we find out that they just want to do this so that they can ambush Paul on the way and kill him. Festus, however, decides Paul should be tried in Caesarea. But when he hears from Paul and the Jews again, Festus concludes that there's no real crime committed. Here in verse 9, we see that Festus isn't against playing politics either. He asked Paul if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem for a trial, but Paul refuses to go back to Jerusalem. He knows that the trial will not be fair there. And perhaps he knows that it would be a death sentence considering their previous plans to kill him. And so Paul appeals to Caesar. This isn't Caesar himself, but Nero, the Roman emperor, before whom he would have a shot at a fair trial. And most importantly, this would send Paul to Rome, exactly where Jesus told Paul he would spread the gospel. After 2 years of waiting on the Lord, a door opens for Paul to go to Rome. Jesus is indeed moving. But Festus has no real charge to send Paul to Rome with, so he takes an opportunity to get some advice. This is where King Agrippa comes in. Now remember, King Herod Agrippa I died in Acts 12. This is King Agrippa, Herod's son. Festus, the new Roman governor, asked the Judean king for advice, who had also brought along his sister Bernice for a visit. We read Festus's words to Agrippa in verses 14 through 21. Festus is trying to lead by the book. The Jews' issues with Paul seem to be merely religious, and so Agrippa agrees to hear Paul's testimony. Verses 23 through 27 set up Paul's big speech in the auditorium before Festus, King Agrippa, and Bernice, and an audience of onlookers. We'll save these verses for tomorrow to help us set the stage for Paul's testimony. The big takeaway from this chapter is that Paul appeals to Caesar to have his trial heard in Rome. Paul is still a prisoner, and we will see him in chains tomorrow as he delivers his speech. But he is watching Jesus do exactly what he said he would right before his eyes. Spoiler alert, the journey to Rome will not be easy. Paul will face a dangerous voyage, facing storms, winter, and even a shipwreck. But Paul will have the comfort and the confidence that Jesus is the true rudder of the ship and of his life. Jesus is with him always. The same is true for us today. I imagine waiting as a prisoner for 2 years was challenging, confusing, and it probably tested Paul's faith a few times. But he held fast to Christ. He held true to a promise that Jesus told him years prior. He would preach the gospel to Rome. Today, we may not have a clear direction from the Lord as to where he's taking us, but we do have instructions from his word. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbors as yourself. Go and make disciples. And there are countless more in the Gospels. In Matthew 6, Jesus tells us that we do not have to worry about what tomorrow holds. God knows what we need. He takes care of the lilies of the field and the birds in the air. How much more will he take care of us? Jesus said, seek his kingdom. And that's how Paul persevered. That's how Paul waited well. Let's behold Jesus today as the one who is in the waiting with us, who sustains us as we seek his kingdom. Let's behold Jesus as the one whose timeline is not like our own. Because we know he is good, we can trust that his timing is good too. If you are in a season of waiting, I hope that you will find this chapter encouraging today. If you want more encouragement for your season of waiting, read Psalm 27. It ends with, I am certain that I will see the Lord's goodness in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong. Let your heart be courageous. Wait for the Lord. I'll see you tomorrow, friends, where we will read Paul's testimony before Festus and King Agrippa, his last defense before he heads to preach the gospel in Rome. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.